Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Soundtracker, and I'm finally here in HD because, well, I figured out after 50 hours of troubleshooting that my webcam wasn't recording in high definition because I hadn't downloaded the drivers yet. Boy, do I feel silly. In any case, I wanted to talk to you today about, well, buying your first set of hi-fi speakers. I mean, honestly, getting this kind of a setup is great in the long term. I mean, if you're really solid on it and you're really interested in buying hi-fi and you work your way up step by step, I mean, this is wonderful to have and a lot of fun to use. But if you're still just dabbling with it and, you know, trying to test the waters out, I think getting a pair of, well, some tinier bookshelf speakers, this will really get you off the ground in terms of, you know, at least getting a decent sound with a smaller, you know, workable space. Now, the trouble with buying a lot of older speakers is, well, right around here. Now, what ends up happening is, over time, the surround foam around other people's speakers, if you happen to be buying a used set, is going to rot away. And what ends up happening is this lovely little thing. These are the tools that I'm going to be using in doing my own refoam job, and honestly, also the tools that I most recommend. I'll show in a minute where to acquire most of the vital things, but you're going to need surround foams for your speakers, speaker wire, and I prefer 18 AWG myself because, well, it's tiny, a plastic razor blade, 91% isopropyl alcohol, a tape measure, a 9-volt battery, twist ties or masking tape, a Q-tip, speaker glue, and a screwdriver to remove the woofer with the dead foam on it. I'm going to be using the Protect toolkit for my choice. Okay, so if you're interested in refoaming a set of speakers that you've just gotten, ordinarily putting in the manufacturer of the speaker and the model number alongside it is going to yield some form of result on eBay at least. The model of speaker that I'm redoing is the Infinity RS-225, and fortunately on eBay they seem to have that particular set of foam. Generally, I like to buy a pre-made kit that somebody else has already put together. It'll usually have 2 surrounds and a glue that matches the color of the speaker. Now, it might be $20, but the alternative is buying all of these pieces separately. If you do end up buying the glue and surrounds separately, the surrounds usually end up coming from China, and you'll need to be on the lookout for the one-piece only bit in the description because you'll only be able to do one speaker if you have one surround. Now, in some cases though, buying the surround and the glue separately isn't a bad option, especially if you don't know what make and model your speaker is. If this is the case, just measure your woofer from edge to edge like I'm doing here and put the diameter into eBay and you should get something. Alright, so the first thing that we have to do is get rid of all of this old foam. Now, ordinarily it should be more brittle than this, but either way, the easiest way to get rid of all of it is by vacuuming. Now, I'm going to be using a Kenmore canister vacuum because it has a variable suction, and, well, that just offers more flexibility when you need less suckage, I guess. Now, that and I just like canister vacuums. I mean, I have never ever seen one that isn't good, and this one seems to handle getting the old surrounds off of the speakers pretty well. Anyways, just try to get as much of the surround off of the cone as possible. I mean, when it starts to look more like this, that's when it'll be pretty much done. With the majority of the surround foam gone, we can go ahead and start disassembling the woofer from the rest of the speaker. In most cases, I would expect the woofer to be held on by a Phillips head screw, but in the case of this particular one, well, just have a closer look. The screws up in the tweeter are all Phillips head screws, but the ones down here holding the woofer in place, well, those are something completely different. These are what's called hex bits, and ordinarily I would say go and get an Allen wrench to get these kinds of things out, but I want to show you something a little bit different today. And I'll admit, that different thing is part of why I'm making this video in the first place. Now, a moment ago I mentioned something called the Protect toolkit, and I'll say this is one of, if not the most capable toolkit I've seen in a while. Taking a closer look at the box, we can really see this is the kind of kit that has been assembled specifically for somebody like, well, like me. I love to take apart gadgets, electronics, Nintendo things, and, well, just have a closer look at this. It's the kind of thing that was really made for disassembling all of your gadgetry. Everything from video game systems to computers to phones. I mean, it's got an anti-static wrist strap, nylon tip tweezers, it's got opening tools, Phillips bits, flatheads, it's got Torx security bits, which is great for your PlayStation. It has nut drivers, it has square drivers, it has both sizes of the Nintendo game bit for all your Nintendo systems. If you do a lot of work modding or fixing game systems or computers or whatnot, this is a really, really good kit to have, and I cannot sing its praises enough. With the praising out of the way, let's take a look at how this kit is actually laid out. Taking the cover off of the box, we have a glossy little logo on the front that says iFixit on a gorgeous cardboard box. And opening the box even further, we have a sturdy little cloth carrying case with another logo on it. I love the look and feel of this case. It's compact, it's tactile, and it looks like it's very, very durable. It both looks and feels like something that's had a lot of thought put into it, and that's even more apparent upon opening it up. Everything is neat, nicely spaced out, and very pleasant to look at, with many of the larger tools having their own individual holsters and straps. In the first section of the case, we have the anti-static wrist strap on the top, the suction cup in the middle, and some of the plastic opening tools on the bottom. Meanwhile, towards the middle of the kit we have our metallic tools, different types of tweezers and spudgers among other things. And in the last compartment, we have beneath the magnetically sealed lid, a set of 64 driver bits for opening just about every gadget imaginable, along with a flexible bit extender on one side and a magnetic driver handle on the other side. Amidst all of these, I've spotted the particular bit that I think I need, so I'm just gonna check and see if this one fits really quickly. And yep, that'll do it. Awesome. So this here is the driver handle, and like any other driver handle, it'll fit right in with its bits. Just insert it, give it a quick turn, and we're on our way to disassembling the speaker itself. With all of the screws out of the rim of the driver, we can take the driver itself out of the speaker's outer case, and I think I should mention about now that when you pull it out, you're going to have two wires attached to the driver itself, so lift it out gently. These wires right here. When you're pulling the wires off, make sure to take note of where each wire goes on the speaker, because if they go back in the wrong orientation, the speakers won't operate properly. The reason I brought out the zip tie before is to mark which wire goes where, and the reason it is a zip tie is mainly because I don't have any masking tape on hand at the moment. Now, fortunately the manufacturers thought of this when they were making the speaker, and while this isn't true of all speakers, this particular set has different sized attachments on the drivers so that there are no wiring screw-ups. Now, in some cases the wires can be pretty difficult to remove, but a little patience, a little wiggling, and a little unnecessary use of force, and that should about do it. This next bit also doesn't apply to all speakers, but mine have this plastic part covering where I'm supposed to put the new foam surrounds, and I didn't realize it was glued on as well. And again, a little patience, a little more force, and hopefully it should separate in one piece if you have something similar. With all of that taken care of, we can move right on into the next step of fixing these things. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to take care of is all the stuff that's around the woofer currently. Even though we vacuumed up most of the stuff that was on the speakers in the first place, there's still going to be a little bit of gunk attached to it, and it's best to take a plastic scraper or something similar that you have and just scrape around the edges. It's the easiest way to get all the stuff off of the metal basket and the cone. When you finish scraping everything off of the edges, the end result should be something, well, at least a lot cleaner. It'll get most of the residue off and should end up looking a bit like this. For everything else that gets left onto the speaker afterwards, though, I go straight to isopropyl alcohol and a paper towel. My alcohol of choice is 91%, and that's because there's a ratio involved. 91% means that there's 91% alcohol in the bottle and 9% water mixed in. Anyways, my method for this is just pour a little alcohol in the paper towel and start scrubbing away. You should see results pretty quickly. Any of the remaining residue will come off of the cone of the speaker, and you should end up with a speaker cone that looks something like this. The reason I'm spending so much time cleaning this thing off is because if you don't clean off the speaker cone, the glue and the foam won't stick to it properly, and you'll just have to redo everything all over again. With the cone cleaned off, though, it's time to turn our attention over to the basket. Now, the metal part surrounding the speaker is known as the basket, and this is also going to be holding part of the surround foam. It's best to clean this part off too because you want to make sure the glue sticks to everything. The basket itself ought to clean up pretty nicely, and in case it doesn't, just run your finger over the edge of it and you should feel the difference. If it's coarse or gooey, just run the paper towel over it again. If not, well, you're ready to go to the next step. Alright, the next thing to take care of is applying glue and putting on the surrounds. And I'm using this particular type of glue because, well, first off I like the color of it, and second off, there's not really a lot of things that we can use for speaker glue. To apply the glue, just squeeze the bottle gently at first because, trust me, this stuff can come out in a huge mess. I've had that happen on a couple of occasions. Just keep squeezing and moving the cone at an even pace, and you should have a pretty thin bead of glue come out on it. Keep working slowly, take your time moving the cone and getting the glue on it, and before you know it, you'll have the surround completely done. Alrighty, with the glue in place, it's time to apply the first surround that we have to put on the speaker. Now, I suppose I should say something like pay attention to the orientation of the foam, but honestly, I've seen speakers do it with either the lip facing up or facing down. My opinion, I generally like to have the new foam facing the same direction that the old foam was, so since this particular set of speakers had the foam facing up, I'm going to put it on facing up. Anyways, with the foam applied to the speaker, wait a few seconds for the glue to start getting tacky. Use your fingers and start pushing the glue against the surround. It should take a couple of minutes to set, but once it's all finished, it should end up holding pretty nicely. Just keep working your fingers around the edge until you see everything starting to stick together, and it should end up looking something like this. Since that's finished, I'm going to let the glue set a little bit, and I'm going to come back to this tomorrow. Okay, 24 hours have passed, the surround feels like it's been stuck pretty well to the foam, and it's time to get on with the next step. For this next part we need a different set of tools, and that's where the speaker wire and the battery comes in. And it's at this point that I've just realized I should probably explain what it is I'm actually trying to accomplish here. Most times when you refoam a speaker, you have to cut off the dust cap, that's the bubble that you see in the center of this picture, and you're usually supposed to stick in bits of paper or card to support the voice coil. This technique is called shimming. You see, to make a sound, a speaker passes an electrical current through the voice coil. The electricity is translated to vibrations with the help of a magnet, and the vibration is pushed out through the center of the speaker just under the dust cap. The coil is wrapped around part of the woofer, but the two are never supposed to touch. Now, if they do, it's damaging to the insides of the speaker. The purpose of the shims is to keep them from touching while the glue dries, and to make sure everything ends up back in the proper position. Now back to what I'm doing. I'm trying to use the battery in place of the shims. Now, by touching the ends of the 9-volt battery to the terminals on the speaker, I can get it to raise or lower without the shims. The practical upshot of this is that I can get everything aligned without having to cut off the dust cap and without having to put shims into the voice coil. Now, obviously, it's going to be pretty difficult to have to hold the battery in place on the terminals while trying to glue the surround foam to the speaker basket, so I'm using speaker wire to help attach the battery to the speaker. Mine in particular have holes through the connectors, but if yours don't, a little electrical tape goes a long way. Just slide the two ends of the wire into the holes and fold them over, and that should keep them pretty secure. Once you've gotten the wire hooked into the speaker, I've found the best way to keep it affixed to the battery is to just make two little hooks and wrap them around the two poles on the top of the battery. I wouldn't suggest taping the wire to the battery because we need to be able to quickly pull the wire off of and put it back on the battery terminal to make sure the speaker is fluctuating properly while the glue sets. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment, but for now keep the battery wired to the speaker because we want to keep it raised while we're putting a bead of glue down. Just like earlier with the cone, work slowly, take your time, and sooner or later it should end up looking something like this. Now that the glue is all set on the underside of the surround, it's time to remove the battery and let the surround fall on the glue. Now, this part is going to be the most time consuming because, well, this is where most of the crucial stuff happens. You want the voice coil to be centered and the surround foam completely glued on. So hopefully, without getting glue on your hands there like I just did, start tapping gently on the edges of the surround and give it a few smooth strokes with your finger. It'll help get everything pressed down and all of the glue decently spread where it needs to be. Now, part of what makes this so time-consuming is there's going to be a lot of back and forth between pressing down the surround and using the battery. A minute ago I advised not to tape the battery to the speaker, and that's because while the glue is still tacky, we need to use the battery while it's drying. Pressing the battery to the wire while the glue is wet will help align the voice coil and bring the surround foam where it needs to be, thus drying it properly and fixing the speaker without needing shims. It'll take a little bit of time, but once the glue starts drying, you can sit back and let it do its thing, and then by the next day you'll be ready for the next step. Alright, everything's dried up and ready to go, and let's start getting the speakers back into where they're supposed to be. Let's grab the cabinet and the hardware that we took out and get everything set up for this next bit. When you're wiring the woofer back in, hopefully the tape or whatever you used comes in handy to put it all back together. I love it when speaker manufacturers have different size connectors like this because it saves a lot of headache when you're putting it back together. And with these back in place, let's start getting this thing back into the cabinet. Alright, so when you're putting the woofer back into the cabinet, it's best to be pretty gentle with it. I mean, I've dropped a couple of these before, admittedly, and some pretty bad disasters can happen. Also, as hard as it was to get off of the speaker, I'm really quite glad that these things come with a plastic ring around the woofer, mainly because it frees up a lot of room to be messy when you glue the outer part of the surround. I mean, with this in front of it, it doesn't matter if you made a mess because there's something covering it. Anyways, once all of the holes are aligned, start plopping in the screws and working your screwdriver, and you should have a good working set of speakers in a few minutes. Alright, I'm really excited at this point. I really want to hear how these things turned out, so let's get them all wired in and let's get everything set up. To see if the glue job and the voice coil hold out, I'm going to crank the bass up to max to really give it a good workout. The album of choice for me is Joe Satriani's Surfing with the Alien, and that's the remastered version because this CD is, for lack of a better phrase, loud as balls. Everything in the low, mid, and high frequencies are maxed out, and every spectrum analyzer I've ever used this with peaks out beyond what it can handle, so logically this should be a good one to test for the Refoam job. Mainly because it'll really work the woofer. I'm sorry I can't play very much of these songs without talking over them, but I'm sure I'll get a copyright flag if I don't, and I'm really not keen on receiving one. I mean, I may have to re-upload this if I do get flagged. Essentially, what I'm looking for, though, is to make sure that the foams are staying secure to the speaker, that the woofer is fluctuating properly, and most importantly, that the voice coil isn't scraping against the inside of the speaker. That one you'd be able to hear if it were happening. It would sound like a rapid clicking sound, but I don't hear that here. As a matter of fact, these both sound awesome, and I'm really glad for that because I have a lot of plans for these speakers. I really can't complain about these speakers. They both sound great and they look beautiful. They're a great set of starter speakers if you're just getting into hi-fi, and I do want to mention though that my normal listening experience is brought to me by the monsters behind them. These are Boston Acoustics A70 loudspeakers, and I have no intention of replacing them. As of right now, those are what I consider to be a perfect speaker. The reason that I wanted these though is twofold. First off, I wanted to demonstrate that it's easy to come across good hi-fi speakers in the wild, and that they're easy to repair. Secondly, for some upcoming videos that I have planned, I've never heard a full surround sound system, and I'd like to go over two incarnations in particular that have been intriguing me for a very long time. Well, since everything's all repaired, the last thing to do is just to put the grills back on and make them look pretty. Anyways, thanks very much for watching, and if you like this video, you know what to do.